The reading is from Revelation 6, verses 1 through 8. When I saw the Lamb break one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out, as with a voice of thunder, "Come!" I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow. A crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he broke the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature call out, "Come!" And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take place from the earth, so that people would slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword. When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature call out, "Come!" I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay. But do not damage the olive oil and the wine." When he broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature call out, "Come!" I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over the 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, famine, and pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth.
We are going through Revelation, the book of Revelation, and it's a confusing book for a lot of folks, and it's one that needs to be deciphered so that it's not as scary to a lot of folks. This passage, we're getting into parts that are oftentimes misconstrued, and oftentimes the illustrations that are given for it are quite horrific. And so I'm just going to back up to where we have been so far just a little bit. John is also known as John the Seer, John the Divine, the Elder. He has been exiled to an island called Patmos, which is just off of Turkey there. He's been given instruction, a revelation, an apocalypse, to send letters to 7 churches. And those are to be read by all these 7 churches over here in Asia Minor, right over here. And it's apocalyptic literature. Now, this was a style of writing that some people think it's written in code, and it was written in secret so no one could read it. It's actually it's a style of writing that people were familiar with. It comes from the Greek word apocalypsis, meaning unveiling of previous hidden truth. It's symbolic, a prophetic style of writing, and it was well known to the people of this time in the 1st century. We're at about 96 AD here. Ezekiel wrote in it, Daniel wrote in it. People that were around in this time, they knew this language. They understood this language. It wasn't a big mystery to them. There were codes. The 7 churches we're talking about were home churches. They met in homes, and they were quite small. This depiction here actually shows more people than most of the people had there. They averaged about 30 folks in their churches. And they were struggling because they were surrounded by images like this. There was a cult of Caesar going on where people worshiped the ones in charge. They worshiped the political figures. They worshiped anybody that was the empire or had anything to do with Rome. So outside of these little home churches were these big, massive monuments and temples and things like that, giving homage to the gods of Caesar and all of that kind of stuff. The Christians themselves were under quite a bit of persecution. They would face in the past, they would face it in their future as well. People oftentimes referred to them as freaks. They didn't like them, and many times that they would try to persecute them and take them away. So starting a church in this time period was a very, very difficult time. And this apocalypse, this revelation, truly is meant to be a word of encouragement to the churches that God is sending. The theme of Revelation is God defeating evil. That's what it's about, God defeating evil. And it's about these folks that are surrounded by a lot of things that they see as evil. It's about them persevering, and it's about John encouraging them. Now, the funny thing is that just like in any letter or anything in the Gospels or anything in the Bible, they're meant to be shared with everybody else too. These 7 churches would have probably been the first audience for it, but they would have copied it, they would have passed it on, and other churches would have read it throughout the whole Middle Eastern community there. And then as the churches grew, more people read them. This is something that we're supposed to read. These letters are not meant, this letter of Revelation is not something that was meant to be read then and just put away in a drawer somewhere. God wants us to hear this too, because he knows that this part is important to us too. So we often hear of the 4 horsemen, and a lot of you have probably seen images of this. This is one of the ones that people love to talk about, and they always put it with the end of the world. You know, if you're watching a movie or something like that, and there's end times, they show oftentimes in these figures 4 horsemen. They even parodied them in the movie Elf with Will Ferrell. You know, the 4 policemen, you know, the rangers or whatever they called them. There's a shot where they're positioned kind of like the 4 horsemen, you know, and it's the end of Santa Claus, you know, as we know it. So whenever they appear, they're supposed to be, you know, evoke fear and all of this kind of stuff. We're going to break this down, but the first thing that I want to talk about is I've had a number of jobs, and people know this. I can't keep a job to save my life. So one of the jobs I had was in drug rehab. And when we would have somebody that would come in that had a problem with alcohol or drug addiction, you feel like it would have been simple if we just took that away from them. You know, in the old days, they would just make them drink until they puked, and they'd think they'd get sick and, you know, send them on their way, or they'd try magic elixirs and all of this kind of stuff. But the true meaning of why someone is doing something like this has to be found. It has to be uncovered. And so when you get people in that have problems with this, you go below the surface and you say, why? Why are you doing this? And what got you to this point? Why are you doing something that you want to escape from? What is it that you want to escape from? And oftentimes you would go down below the surface and you would have to bring up things that oftentimes they did not want to be brought up. Things in their past, or things that have happened to them, or things in their childhood, or emotional baggage that was hard to talk about. And we do that too sometimes. We might have a bad day and blow up at somebody, but the reason that we're blowing up at somebody isn't really the reason. You notice that? It usually means because something is going on in our lives and we don't want to talk about it. We'd rather just yell at somebody, but we don't want to talk about it. In order to get through it, you have to bring up some of that ugly in order to talk about it. Counseling does that, therapy does that, all of this kind of stuff. Friends do that. If you're willing to hear it, to talk to somebody, to bring up the ugliness. And sometimes you have to do that. You have to bring up this ugliness and you have to put it on the table and you have to focus on it, right? In order to do something about it. This is the theme of what we're reading right now. This is what it has all to do with. Remember, the theme of Revelation is God defeating evil. Now, the first thing that God must do is see the evil. It must be brought to the surface, all of it must be brought to the surface so that we can deal with it. Just like when we deal with our feelings. I can have a bad day, but unless I go down below of what's causing that bad day, I'm still going to have more and more bad days. And so I have to display the ugliness. And that's what we're getting into. We're at the 7 seals. Last time we had John sees God holding this scroll with 7 seals. The only one worthy of touching it is Christ. Christ starts to break those 7 seals. And the creatures that we see represent the animal kingdom. We've gone through that. If you want to go back and look at any of this stuff, it's all on our YouTube page. We have I think a sermon playlist that you can just go back and reverse and watch them. And so we're seeing the breaking of the seal. This is God's plan to defeat evil. And so the first thing that we must see is what is it that God has to defeat? And that's when we get into this naughty business here of the horses and the riders. I'm just going to go through some of the passages here. And I'm sorry for my voice there. I tried a lot of wine this morning. It didn't help, but it made me care less. But that's not true. Then I saw the Lamb break one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out as with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow. A crown was given to him. And he came out and conquering and to conquer. Now, there's been speculation from some folks that say that this is Jesus, that Jesus starts the whole thing. But it doesn't. It's not something that stays consistent with the theme of Revelation. Jesus is opening the seals. This is not to represent Jesus. Remember, we are uncovering the badisms. We're uncovering the ugly here. Jesus is not part of that. So this white horseman, we suspect that is the conquering king. This white horseman is, remember, all of this is apocalyptic language. There are not going to be actual people riding horses with a bow and a crown wiping everybody out. Okay? Let's put that aside right now. This is symbolic. This is almost symbolic poetry. It's not the stuff that Nightmares is made of. It's stuff that God is trying to reassure us of stuff. And so this represents kingdoms. This represents empires. This represents what in the first century they were up against was a ruling regime. It's about the empires that go through and they take over lands, and they take over people, and they pull away the rights of people. They diminish people, they hurt people, they kill, they slaughter, all to build their kingdoms. That's what this is about. We've seen it throughout history, all of our lives. We see it today. Even the biggest countries, America, we did this to the Native Americans. The Empire of England has done this through the UK. All of us have histories that we're not exactly proud of, where in order to build our land and wealth, we have done that by stepping on other people. That's what this first wave is the kingdom of conquest and oppression. And so when we're looking at the problems again, remember, this is about God defeating evil. He's saying, okay, what are the things that are happening? What is evil? Show me it. We see this. People hurting other people to stand on top of themselves. That's what it is. And then we go back and it says, when he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature call out, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people would slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword. This sounds really, really scary. And boy, when you, again, careful what you Google, because if you Google some of this stuff, you're going to go down some rabbit holes, and a lot of the illustrations, it's just horrific. But what we're talking about here is the removal of peace. We face it now. Or the removal of even the superficial appearance of peace. We like to think that we're peace, we lived in peaceful times. I tell my son that I actually remember a time when between the Vietnam and the conflict in Iraq, there was this period where we weren't at war. But the world was. The world was not a peaceful place. We could call it, those were the peaceful times. And sometimes we even like to refer to that in politics, that person kept us peaceful and all of this kind of stuff. We're not there yet. We never have been. This world has been at war with one another since the beginning, since Cain first knocked down Abel. We have been not at peace. And so what God is saying is that the other part of this evil that's going to be brought up to the surface is this denial, this whole thing that there is the saying that there's peace in the world. We're actually going to put out and say what we feel. Like when we're talking about like an addiction, what is the true raw feeling that we have? The true rawness of peace is that we still hurt each other. We still annihilate each other. We still are at war with each other. Sometimes that is the war of countries. Sometimes that's the war of two people. Sometimes that's the abuse of somebody, verbal, physical, whatever the case may be. It's going to be brought to the surface so God can say, that is it. Follow me so far on that? All right, we got 2 down. We're going more here. Aren't you glad you fought the stuff to hear this? When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature call out, "Come." And as I looked, there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay. But do not damage the olive oil and the wine." What is he talking about when he mentions this stuff? What is it about a day's pay for this and that, but yet don't damage the olive oil or the wine? We see this today too. The staples, wheat, bread, the very staples of what keeps the family nourished, those prices go up. And suddenly a poor family cannot afford just the staples of their existence. They can't afford to feed themselves. But the olive oil, the wine, those are luxury items. Don't mess with those. Because what's happening here is what Jesus and God, what they're saying is what's brought up, part of this evil, is the rich hanging on to their wealth while the poor remain having to pay and pay and pay. This separation is what this whole thing is about. It signifies the economic problems, the rich above the poor. Jesus does not like that. God does not like that when we make sure that we're comfortable while other people are starving. We don't like that. And that's part of the things that's coming around. That's why he's saying, don't mess with the luxury items, the wine, the oil. Those are things that the people that wanted just enough money to feed themselves with the wheat, they couldn't even dream of even experiencing. It was so out of their realm there. The people of the first early churches, they were not rich. This was also something that they didn't have either. And so it was protect the rich on the backs of the poor. We're talking about hurting people still. And that's what this is all about. Again, we're bringing all of this stuff up. And God's saying, this is what the problem is. This is what all of this problem is. This is evil. He broke the 4th seal. I heard the voice of the 4th living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death. And Hades followed him. They were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, famine, pestilence, and by wild animals of this earth. This is the abode of the dead. Hades is a reference. It is not saying hell. It is saying the abode of the dead. The first century people knew that this just meant non-existence. This just meant being put away like trash. And this is the ultimate threat to every tyrant, every person that rules. We are all subject to death. And this will get into a part where not only are the people that are oppressing killing, but eventually evil will face this as well. And so what God is sending is a clear message that the 4 things here are the very basics of what our sinful nature is, the very basics of what our evil is, the very basics of what we rule. We learn, just like from the 4 horsemen, whatever you want to call them, we want to be comfortable, and sometimes we do that on the backs of other people. Sometimes we take things that aren't ours at the victims of other people. We go to war with one another. We hate one another. We do things that hurt one another. And we do things in this world that have killed one another. This is what surfaces. This is what God in this point is pointing out as the very basic. But I remind us, This is what's going to start here. And this is the mystery. You wonder why God just doesn't wipe this stuff out. But we're built the same way. We're built the same way. If I'm abusing drugs, I'm trying to escape for something. The only thing that's going to save me from that is to bring up from the surface the things that have caused me pain, the things that I need to work through. We can't just ignore things in our lives. We have to work through them. And sometimes that's hard, and sometimes that's bad. 99% of the time when somebody comes to me as a pastor and wants to talk about an issue that they have, most of the time, if it's if it's causing them emotion, it's not what they came in to talk about. You usually have to go below, and you have to be uncomfortable for a while. And you have to bring up the things that are hurtful and harmful and things that have, in their past, that they've gone through. They don't want to see it, but in order to get through it, sometimes we have to see it. And this is where it starts with Revelation. There's not a nightmare to this, but there is a reality. There is evil in this world, and God is going to vanquish that evil. God is going to destroy that evil. But before we destroy it, he is going to bring it to the surface and show us what it is. Now, one thing I do want to make sure that we understand too is that we go 1, 2, 3, 4 in this, and we think that this is all going to happen in stages. It's not. This is not about stages. Remember, this is apocalyptic language, and he's just picking, and he's saying, we've got this, we've got this, we've got this. Most people would agree that this stuff is already happening in our world. And it was happening in the first century. They're not talking about these horsemen that are going to come in, ta-da, I bring you this thing, and all this kind of stuff, and I'm going to wipe this out and give me your bread and all this kind of stuff. We're talking about the evil that is in this world. 1 does not come before 2 and 3 and 4. You don't wait for the order of it. It's all happening. And this imagery will be repeated throughout Revelation with the clear message of this is the problem that God will destroy. So the people in the first century faced the same thing that we face now. There is trouble in this world. There is heartache in this world. Some of us, we enter a new year that we are terrified of. Some of us, we enter a day that we wake up in the morning that we're terrified of. The people of the first century churches knew how that felt. Every day they went to these small churches and they wondered, how can we survive? How can we make a go of it? And they wondered around them, will this ever go away? They knew people that had been persecuted or taken away or bullied because of their faith, because what they wanted to do was to share love when they were surrounded by people that wanted to celebrate power. 2 different things there. And John's telling them, stay the course and stay with it. God's going to take care of this. This is what it is. It's not going to be pretty. It's going to get ugly. There are going to be times when it is defeating. But God is going to take care of this. And it will be okay. Because you need to stay the course. Because you are part of the Lamb. Stay with the Lamb. And that's why we still read this today. Not much has changed. You can almost hear the galloping of these horses throughout our lives today. And Jesus is saying, stay the course. Stay the course. This will be taken care of. Stay the course. Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, we thank you for all that you give us. We thank you for the blessings in our lives. We thank you for the honesty. Give us the courage to own the things inside of us that are preventing us from experiencing the joy in our lives. Help us to bring our troubles and pain to the surface. Help us to do that in a safe environment with safe people to where we can talk about the evils in our lives, the things that have harmed us in our lives, the ugly in our lives. Help us to mention it so that we can manage it. Help us to work with it and through it so that we can experience the joy and get rid of it. Help us to vanquish the evil and hang on to the peace. In Jesus' name, Lord, we pray. Amen. Every one of us, just like what we witnessed here with the four horses, every one of us does have stuff inside of us. We have years of joy and laughter in our lives, but we also have things that have caused us hurt and pain and grief. The more that we can talk about that stuff, the more it doesn't control us. The more that we can share that stuff, the more we can release ourselves from it. The example that we're going to be reading about as we continue in Revelation is about this, calling it, owning it, getting rid of it. Some things we know that in our present stage, you cannot just get rid of. Some of the pain you just learn to live with. But the more that you can share it, the more you can be around trusted people that will love you regardless, the more we can be through it, the more we can be we. The first song that we sang today was Come As You Are. That's been kind of the cornerstone of this church, is that people can come and be their honest self. I pray today that we can continue to do that and continue to spread that message to others that we are welcomed here as we are. We are a community of people that love God, love ourselves, love our neighbor. May we do that today.